Kia ora koutou and welcome to the NZ Landcare Trust webinar regarding wetlands and your farm environment plan. We're just going to allow a few more minutes to let people in. We have Nathan Burkepile from NZ Landcare Trust as our keynote speaker today, and Lorraine Cook from Horizons Regional Council coming in for our question and answer session at the end, and Laura Keenan from KS Agri, who will give a bit of a regional example of what can be achieved in our area. I'll announce them in more detail in a few minutes. We've got about 23 attendees so far and about 70 registered, so I'll just give it a few more minutes. If anyone would like to use the chat function to post up any questions during the webinar today, I'll keep note of them and then ask Nathan and the team at the end. Right, I'll start with the opening karakia for everyone. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai, e hiaki ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei mauri ora. So that's mainly around calming the winds of Tawhiri Mātia, the wind over the land, and also bringing us back into ourselves to listen to and take in the knowledge today. I first of all would like to give a big thank you to the panelists that are here today. My name is Tanya Bramley. I'm the New Zealand Landcare Trust Coordinator for the Manawatu Wanganui region, and I've been in the role for just going on 2 years now, and getting to know quite a few of the people who are coming in today as an attendees. So it's been a real pleasure coming to the region and viewing the magnificent landscapes and seeing awesome examples of wetlands all over the place. So I'm really excited about this topic and this space. Our first panelist today is Nathan Burkepile, who's our Hawke's Bay NZ Landcare Trust Coordinator, and he's also a wetland specialist with extensive knowledge of working in the wetlands space, both in New Zealand and the United States with the Native American nations over there. And in New Zealand, he works with private landowners, catchment groups, and mana whenua on a wide range of different types of wetlands. For the last month, he's been caught up in the floods in the Hawke's Bay and the East Coast region, and helping his community to recover from those. He's also looking forward to putting forward another series of webinars in the future regarding flood mitigation. So look forward to those coming in a few months. We also have Laura Keenan, who's the founder of KS Agri and is based in the Manawatu. She's an agronomist and environmental consultant. Laura is experienced in delivering environmental outcomes for farmers, and she's got extensive knowledge of national and local policy guidelines to help with practical decisions on farms. So she's a great panelist to have today for the question and answer session as well. She'll be giving an example of Silverton Pastoral Farms in Halcombe and a project that's been done there. So she's also involved on the association and the board for the New Zealand Institute of Primary Industry Management, and has started a PhD at Lincoln University where she's focusing on improving the profitability of farm systems and environmental outcomes when using forage crops. So thank you for coming along today, Laura. And we also have Lorraine Cook from Horizons Regional Council. She's a terrestrial ecologist in the science team, and as part of this work, she supports the biodiversity team with a large focus on wetlands, both identifying them and assessing their condition as required to help implement the wetland components of the National Freshwater Policy Statement. So there's lots to think about when tackling a wetland project, and we've got Lorraine and Laura and Nathan and your local land management advisor are there to help. So the best thing to do is to get in touch with Horizons when you are planning something. This webinar is being recorded for those of you who'd like to go back and review the content, or for those that have not managed to log in today. And I'll be monitoring the chat throughout the talk, and then we'll bring those questions up. If you have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll bring them up at the end during the question and answer session. We're trying to keep to a strict hour, so I won't talk too much longer. We'll hand over to Nathan, and he's going to speak first about different types of wetlands and how you can integrate them into your farm environment plan. Thank you, Nathan.
Had to unmute myself. The screen up, Tanya? Thanks. Yes. Okay. Kia ora, my name is Nathan Burkepile. I'm over here in Hawke's Bay. And we're going to have a little bit of chat about wetlands and farm environment plans. This isn't about farm environment planning. This is sort of, I've got my farm environment plan. What do I do after that? And we'll have a little bit of a chat. And if I can advance my slides, it'd be really good. There we go. So what goes into a farm environment plan? Like I said, I'm not an expert in farm environment plans, but what we're interested in is mapping. So when you or your consultant go around, you'll map your property. During that mapping process, you'll locate your wetlands and potential sites for wetlands. So we'll talk a little bit about after you've done your map, what to do. Stock exclusion, we'll have a little bit of talk about stock exclusion, and then we'll go into some good management practices around wetlands, and also using wetlands for reducing nutrient loads and around your planning of those things. So the freshwater policy statement, a statement that we all love and has gone through a little bit of iterations, but policy number 6 says there's no further loss of extent of natural inland wetlands. Their values are protected and their restoration is promoted. So with New Zealand's 90% loss of wetlands, there's a lot of pressure on this, and this is why wetlands are part of the freshwater policy statement, and actually a fairly big part of the freshwater policy statement. The Resource Management Act, which is the act that the councils work under, define it as wetlands include permanently and intermittently wet areas, shallow waters, and land water margins that support natural ecosystems of plants and animals that adapt to these conditions. The main thing to think about is a lot of people think wetlands have open water and are around year round, but we got intermittently wet. We call ephemeral wetlands. They are wet enough that they don't generally grow your dryland plants. They grow more wetland plants, but yep. And then some wetlands won't even have any open water. They'll be wet on the grounds and there won't be any open water because all the vegetation takes over. So there's a lot of variety of wetlands. A lot of confusion around the national policy statement about what's included as a natural inland wetland. And just to clarify some things, it is not a constructed wetland. It's not a wetland that you built for duck shooting, for aesthetics and that kind of thing. They do, if the wetland was created, it doesn't fall into what a natural wetland is. And I won't worry about geothermal wetlands because it's a very unique area which most people won't have to worry about. And then the other thing is it's an improved pasture that at the commencement date, that's of the freshwater policy statement, that is dominated by more than 50% of exotic pasture species and is subject to temporary rain-derived water pooling. And this is around some of those ephemeral seasonal wetlands that have been developed in the past. They don't fall into it, but now the freshwater policy statement's enacted, you can't convert those ephemeral areas into paddocks. There's a little bit of there's always a little bit of play in this, and also your regional council rules and regs, if they're stricter than what the policy statement is, it will. The stricter one follows. So Lorraine will have a little bit of insight into that for you. So as an ecologist, when I look at wetlands, there are three features I look at to identify a wetland. I look at the hydrology. Is there water present at the surface or within the root growing zone for a portion of the growing season? We look at the soils. The soils hydrate, and it gets really complicated when you look at soils, but you can usually tell when you dig soils. A lot of times they're gray because they're deoxygenated because of the water, and it's kind of neat little to see when you compare it across. And then we also look at wetland biota, and most of the times when we're describing wetlands, we're talking, most ecologists will look at the plant life first and see what plants are there. We have what they call facultative plants and obligate plants. The obligate plants grow in wetlands, where the facultative will grow in wetlands, but they also grow in drying. And we use those to define the edges of wetlands. Wetlands don't have a straight edge. It's kind of a blurry edge, but we always look at these things. So hydrology is the main factor that describes a wetland, because it is a wet land. But a lot of times we use the biota to do it, and a lot of us will look at soils. For today, I want to have a little bit of time, because I'll throw some terms and references to you. When I say wetland restoration, I'm referring to return a wetland to a former condition, at least functionally. When we say creation, we refer to establish a wetland where a wetland never existed. And I don't know why I just did that. Okay. And then enhancement activities are basically something like planting a wetland up in plants. The wetland itself is intact, and you just want to enhance it by including plants and that kind of thing. And then we'll have a chat around constructed wetland. And a constructed wetland is basically a created wetland used to treat runoff usually. And on farms, it's general runoff, and we will have a little bit of a chat about that. But it generally, you put a constructed wetland where there's no wetlands before. So when you got your farm environment plan, you're sitting there and like, okay, I've got this map. What do I do now? So you look at your map and say, oh, I have this wetland over here, this wetland over here, this wetland over here. What do we do? And after you identified those wetlands, basically you've got to exclude those wetlands from stock, and that's with fencing and that kind of thing. I always advise, when you're fencing wetland stocks, give yourself a buffer. It allows that wetland to grow some terrestrial vegetation, and increases biodiversity, and does stuff. While you're mapping it out, your contractor who's helping you map it out might be able to find and identify what damaged wetlands or drained wetlands that, they just you've tried draining them for years and they just don't drain right. They might be a good place to restore wetlands. And so identifying those would be your second priority when you're looking at your farm environment plan. So as you're planning out the next 5-10 years of your farm plan, high priority is just getting those wetlands that exist protected, and then identifying areas where you have damaged wetlands to restore. In catchments that have high nutrient levels, we move to those, create new wetlands. We construct wetlands to reduce nutrients coming from runoff. And that would be, that would go up to a higher priority. However, by protecting those wetlands that exist, that actually helps with the runoff, and those wetlands that exist, if they're functioning properly, are probably better at removing nutrients than starting a constructed wetland. It'll take a while for constructed wetlands to remove those nutrients. So wetland protection is, again, I pointed out that not all wetlands have open water. And basically, like I said, it's making sure that the hydrology is right, there's no drainage through it, and fencing it off. Some have had vegetation removed, so you might want to do some enhancement in the future. But for the most part, your priority is just getting them fenced and protected. Seepage wetlands generally don't fall under the freshwater policy statement because they're under half a hectare. And but they are incredibly important. Research done by Derry and Zed has found that these seepage wetlands, and that's this little seepage right here, are really good at removing nutrients. So protecting these little seepage wetlands should be a priority if you have them on your property. Again, they're really good at removing nutrients. So you would add those up into your things, and basically seepage wetlands, just fencing them off and letting them grow with the native sedges and grasses will allow them to remove nutrients. A little bit of a decision-making tree here for you, for those who want to protect seepage wetlands. They're basically low cost. Like I said, it's just a little bit of fencing, easy to implement. Anybody can do it. Easy to maintain and cheap, because basically after you fence it off, it just maintains itself. They're not big, so they don't require a lot of lands and to retire. Some of these seepage wetlands are extremely diverse and have a lot of different species, and will reduce flooding, a subject very near and dear to my heart lately. Just by fencing those seepage wetlands, letting that native vegetation go, any runoff that goes down into those seepage wetlands and through, it just slows those flows down. The only thing is it is not suitable for high strength effluent. So yeah, and you can, if you want, you can install some weirs in those seepage wetlands to just slow that water down. But when you install the weirs, there's a little bit of a maintenance cost. So it's just one thing to consider, but they are extremely important, and they're all across our landscape. So so low-lying fruit if you have a nutrient issue in your wetlands. Restoring wetlands. Usually we identify areas to restore wetlands, or those were drained wetlands at one time, and just are poor production areas anyways, because they're wet part of the year, or you just couldn't drain them properly. After you restore them, they're cheap and easy to maintain. Once you get the hydrology right, yeah, you'll have some weed issues, and we can discuss that a little bit later. Generally, to restore a wetland, it's a lower cost than if we created a whole new wetland. Extremely high biodiversity values. Again, 90% loss of wetlands in New Zealand. By restoring wetlands, we increase, we offset that loss a little bit. Again, reduces downstream flooding because you're holding water back on the landscape. And one of the disadvantages, again, high strength effluents, they're not good for. So around dairy farms, if you got a high strength, if you've got effluent coming off, you don't want to put them through your restored wetland. Most likely restoring wetlands nowadays will require consent. A lot of times when we restore wetlands, even a damaged wetland still classified as a wetland. So to restore it, you might have to do a resource consent to do the restoration effort. And again, large land requirement for restoring wetlands, but generally it's usually poor production land. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. So just real quick, I could spend all day on what techniques we need to restore wetlands and stuff, but usually it's around drainage ditches. New Zealand's pretty good at putting drainage ditches in over the time, and dealing with those blocking those drainage ditches. Some of our wetlands have been filled in over time. A lot of times silts and that kind of thing have filled in our wetlands. So excavating out silt. Don't do too many breaching of dikes and levees. I have in the past to reconnect wetlands to stream flows and that kind of thing. Controlling sediment and other pollutants and restoring water quality is part of it. Exotic species, is all of us who've dealt with wetland know that there's a lot of invasive grasses and plants that deal with our wetland. Replanting, reintroducing fish and other wildlife, controlling predators, restoring buffers. And like I said, I always like putting buffers around my wetlands. Under the national policy statement, you can't spray chemicals within 10 meters of a wetland. So I actually think that's a good place to stick your fencing. Use that 10-meter buffer to buffer your wetland. And a lot of times we restore the connection between wetlands and adjacent waters by removing dams and ditches and stuff. Classic example here, this is up in Northland. This whole wetland area is a drained wetland. It's got a big catchment that's used for dry stock and a little bit of lifestyle blocks. By taking and cleaning out this drain and blocking the drain on the sloping side, and then here at the bottom where the drain cuts down, we could restore that wetland, that would capture all the runoff off this and actually increase water quality down below. So, and as you can see, it was drained and tried to graze at one time. And again, look, it's low production land. It's scrubby, it's wet and boggy during the winter time. So this farmer, by restoring this wetland, would not lose anything. So these are sort of the places I look for when we're restoring wetlands. And again, really no loss to the value of the wetland is Laura will talk about later. So you're in a catchment with high nutrients in your streams and stuff. And so where do we go from there? Constructed wetlands are an option. And there's a little bit of advantages and disadvantages. They do have high ecological value. You can use them to treat high contamination. I've seen some constructed wetlands where they take pig effluents and run it through a series of 12 different wetlands, and the water comes out clean enough to eat. So, you know, when you're constructing wetlands, you can take some really high effluents and treat it. And there's a high retention time. Like I said, you know, like that piggery, there were 12 wetlands. By the time that water moved through there, it was almost a month. It was almost a month before when the fluent went in till the water came out the other end. Constructed wetlands require large lands, like requirements, generally flat. You know, when we're looking at constructed wetlands, we want to do as flat land as possible, which is usually prime grazing land. So there's a little bit, most likely will require a resource consent. There's some instances it doesn't, but for the most part, they do. Generally constructed wetlands have pipes and everything else, which means there's a high maintenance commitment to it. And I spelled commitment wrong. And a high cost. Some of the constructed wetlands on farms that we've seen in the high $80,000 to $120,000, $150,000. So they do have a high cost versus some of the restorations projects we do. You're looking at 10 to 20, 30,000. So a little bit less. They're all things to consider as you're looking at your farm environment plan. So when we look at constructed wetlands, we want it sized that actually we get the most contaminant reduction, especially if we're using a large area. So generally we look at 1 to 5% of the contributing catchments. Surface flow is usually what we're dealing with. So that's the ground, the flow on the ground. We generally make them elongated, multi-stage systems, depending upon how strong your fluent is. And we're looking for that overall length width ratio of 5 to 1 to 10 to 1. So long oval forming. Initial deep sediment tump pond in one while we do them, and the rest is shallow, 300 mils depth that allow for vegetation to grow through. And then at the bottom end, we usually want some open water. So we're looking at 70% shallow and 30% open water. Here's a constructed wetlands that was done in Hawke's Bay by NIWA. Water comes in. There's a big sediment pond up there in the top left-hand corner, and it flows through these. And this is just right after it's done, so it's not filled. So you can see the 2 open ponds, and the middle will be shallow, and it goes through the series and out. They can be big and complex down to and expensive. That one was over 300,000. To small and a field type wetlands. This is a 0.7 hectare wetlands dealing with 17 hectares of hillside that flowed down. And this is actually 1, 2, 3 wetland complexes right after it was done. So the vegetation is not grown into it yet. But it comes down and it flows in through, cleans, and then we've got these grassy areas to act as filters too. So a wetland like this is somewhere around 5 to 10,000 versus, the larger ones. End of tile drain type wetlands, where we got a tile drain that comes into a sediment trap and then flows through a wetland. These are this is down in Otago. The Pamahaka group put this in and are really getting some really nice results with theirs. One of my favorites is building wetlands in our drainage ditches. Doesn't require a lot of commitment to lands, and it's just a matter of widening our drainage ditches and putting shallow water wetlands in. Again, another drainage ditch one, but we had to put a little bit of grade controls into it, but not a lot of land commitment that we would have in a normal constructed wetland. For those of you who are interested in constructed wetlands, there are some really good resources. NIWA and Chris Tanner has put out a few of them and is the experts on them, and they're really good. This constructed wetland practitioner guide is excellent and a little technical, but it does show you what can be done, and it has quite a few case studies in it. Just came out last year. When I'm looking at areas for a constructed wetland or like an edge of the field wetlands, an area like this is pretty interesting because you've got highland and you got this lowland dip, and this probably was the wetland at one time, but this whole flat was drained. The stream's been drained, but this is actually a really nice place. You could actually put in a edge of field wetland that wouldn't take up that much. And again, as you can see that bottom there, it is not really the greatest of grazing areas. So this swale here could be created into a wetland, a little bit of fencing, and still not lose a lot of productivity off the land. So I look for those low-lying areas where water generally wants to flow, and can we put a wetland at the end of that field to treat any runoff coming off. Here's a nice little wetland we did up in Northland. Again, there's runoff coming off this hillside into the wetland in various places, flows through the wetland and down into what was a drain at one time. And again, it was just, this was actually a wet area that was obviously drained at one time, and we just created back into a wetland. A little bit different than a constructed wetland because we've got the edges, but we got flow coming in from different areas. So it will flow through the wetland at different pathways. A lot of times I don't have a lot of area that you want to do if you want to construct a wetland for improving water quality. And we do what I call treatment chains. So we've got a sediment trap here, and then this will be a sedge filter eventually, and a sedge and flax filter down into these three wetlands. And these are all shallow wetlands with a little bit of open water because the landowner wanted some open water to look out on his little shack there. And then the bottom one has another open water area. So the open water areas were designed to basically destroy E. coli, because E. coli is killed by UV light. Interestingly, there's a pond above this, and I didn't think the sediment trap would have been useful, but actually a lot of sediment has come down and filled it up. When putting a sediment trap in, you want to make sure that you can get a digger in to clear out the sediment trap. This is the same sediment trap as this one a few months later, and you can see the algal buildup because of the sediment with carrying phosphorus into that trap. So it's taking out a lot of that phosphorus, and we see that algal buildup. And so that's my presentation. Like I said, when you're looking at your farm environment plan, you're planning out your wetlands. Priority is protecting those that you have and restoring those that you have. And then if you got water quality issues, you move down to that constructed wetlands, and that's my recommendation when I work with landowners. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Nathan. We've had a couple of questions come through, which we'll address in a moment after we hear from Laura Keenan.
Yep.
So Laura Keenan is from KS Agri and very much active in the space in the Manawatu with working with landowners on different consents and has a lot of knowledge to share. I'm just going to share my screen, and Laura can let me know when to change slides. Is that showing up okay, Laura?
Thanks, Tanya. Good afternoon, everyone. What I'm going to talk to you about today is a business called Silverton Pastoral Limited, which is a 1,300 hectare mixed cropping and lamb finishing property based in Halcombe and Cheltenham. The Cheltenham block is predominantly all LUC1 land, still has a large proportion of wetlands due to the size of the property, which has actually all come from the interest of the previous owner. And the Silverton property is a little bit different. It's the hub of the business essentially, and the 900 hectares, which is in Halcombe, is on rolling clay country, and essentially it runs lamb trading. We've got a small ewe flock on the ineffective sort of steeper areas of the property, which are unsuitable to crop, and has a very high degree of rolling landscape. So if we just go next slide, please, Tanya. So what we sort of had a conversation around as a family was that there's a lot of area which was essentially ineffective. It would have surface water, particularly during winter, and it's sort of the bottom of those gully systems which we wanted to look to implement some wetland sort of systems into that project. So we sat down and sort of designed with the productive landscape of the property. We designed 6 hectares of potential areas which could go into a wetland-based system. And we've learned a huge amount during this process. The first thing that we actually did was engage with Fish and Game to see if there was any appetite from their point of view to assist us with this project, and they have, and they also came to us with a small amount of funding as well. And we couldn't have done it without their assistance and support, and also Horizons as well. And we have essentially designed 6 areas of the property which look very similar to this one, which you can see here. So there's a degree of croppable land, and then these wetland systems which have been designed obviously to slow down the pathway of water moving off these rolling blocks, particularly in high rainfall months, which Nathan explained so well in the previous slides. And then also they're relatively shallow. So these wetlands all range in size, all range in depth from about 0.3 metres to up to about 0.7, 0.8 metres in depth. So this is unfenced. This was sort of phase 1 of the project, where we, in the summer of 2021, 2022, worked with some digger and excavator operators to essentially carve out these wetlands, put some dam walls up at the top to stop water movement, and obviously pop some islands in the middle for local fauna and flora as well as bird life. Next slide, please. This is an example of another wetland. So this actually was existing, and we've just made it bigger and added essentially the islands in the middle, and carved out a little bit of the landscape to get our length, which is really interesting compared to what Nathan touched on before, because this was actually a relatively circular wetland, and we've just opened it up a little bit and tried to create more length to this part of the property. And we were getting actually a lot of stock, which down to the bottom right hand of your screen, that they would actually just get a little bit bogged in the winter up to their hocks in the winter, and they just did not like going down that part of the farm. So we've fenced it off and created a doubly large size. So this one is actually 1.4 hectares in size, this entire wetland from the top to the bottom. Very long, and just much better in terms of stock movement in paddocks, and eradicated some grasses. Actually, this wetland project, a byproduct actually of this for us being in a lamb trading environment, has been incredibly helpful in terms of for excluding stock from areas which may have pasture with a worm burden. So we're just trying to sort of tick more box rather than one in regards to our animal production system and also the environmental system, which is very important. Next slide, please. So this is phase 2, where we have fenced the wetlands and worked with Horizons to ascertain a grant for part of this fencing as well. All of the sites have been sprayed out for planting of all of our native trees, which was done last winter, and they are coping okay. We've lost a few plants due to a pretty wet winter this year. They haven't coped too well, but we'll just do a bit of a secondary planting this winter for any that we lost with the excessive rainfall that we've had in the past 12 months. And this just makes it so much easier from a maintenance point of view. Stock excluded, you know, no stock will ever go into these parts of the property again, and it just from a management point of view makes it so much easier for us when we're sort of going around the farm trying to manage large volumes of stock with trades over the winter period. Next slide. So just the same paddocks so that you can see the scale and the size of the wetland. Nathan will be very interested to get your perspective on how these have been built and designed. But our digger excavators and also working with Horizon and Fish and Game taught us a heck of a lot. We sort of started this process and obviously had a good understanding of the natural landscape, but not much experience in terms of forming, maintaining and setting up really good wetlands that can last the test of time. They've got a big capture area due to the rolling landscape of this property, so we wanted to make sure that we did it right, and some of the wetlands are actually very large in scale, so it's important that we do actually have stock excluded. Sheep only on this property, so less of an issue in terms of with soil movement and things like that during heavy rainfall events, but still important to keep these wetlands sound moving forward. Next slide. As you can see, this guy is planted, and what we wanted to do is we really love seeing bird life on the property. So having islands in the centre was a main thing for encouraging bird life, and also aesthetically, we just thought it was incredibly pleasing to see, you know, flora and fauna and giving them a place to survive within the farm system for it to work cohesively as a wetland system, but also a productive farming environment. And when we look around the farm, it's just been so rewarding. Keep going, Tanya. It's just been so rewarding to see here these, you know, these wetlands come to the fore. This is another one, same time as in terms of planting. You can see all the plants coming up, and that's actually looking not too bad in terms of ground cover. But when you look across the farm, even in this environment, this is a winter photo. It just is incredible to see here these wetlands in action, and actually here with our rainfall sitting at 1200 mils. It's incredibly important to be working alongside Mother Nature and actually trying to reduce our environmental footprint. When we're thinking about the numbers, so we were fortunate to receive a small grant from Fish and Game, but this project, the six hectare project, cost the business about $90,000, so anywhere from $13,000 to $16,000 a hectare for establishment of the wetlands. And that obviously does not include our time in terms of that is just digger operator, excavator operator, and none of the planting or planning time is included in that figure. So it is a considerable investment. It's something which we're actually incredibly proud of as a business, but it's definitely been a little bit tricky with our climatic environment. Probably if we knew, we wouldn't have put these wetlands in just yet in light of recent rainfall events, but hopefully they've done their job and helped our footprint on the environment moving forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. That's really inspiring for everyone. Sorry, I'll just stop sharing. Great. Nathan, did you have any comments on that presentation before we move into questions out of interest? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, the one thing that I've made a couple notes here is that constructed wetlands generally are oval shaped and ugly. And so when we do wetlands, a lot of times that are for water quality, we try to keep that 30% 30% open water, 70%. But I'm also keen that most of our wetland birds and wetland fish or fish and other species see the same decline as we saw in wetlands. So if you can add biodiversity values to your work and make them a little bit more acceptable to biodiversity, it's a win-win. So you get water quality and biodiversity values. So yeah, very few of mine look like a standard NIWA constructed wetland, and part of that is because most of the landowners I work with are around, want to see biodiversity too with it. So yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. So we had some questions come through via the registration forms. I'll go through those first. So just reintroducing Lorraine Cook from Horizons Regional Council, who's also on hand if there's any questions that our other two panelists aren't able to answer, or if you want to interject anywhere, Lorraine, just go for it. So the first question was, what cultural and ecological benefits are there for iwi Māori landowners in this space? Do you want to take that one, Nathan?
Yes, it's yeah, very, very important, and across the landscape, Mahinga Kai is just extremely important. Plus a lot of the things, and I've seen somebody making a comment in here also about preferences for natural species, and yeah, I just don't, we don't do any exotics, or I don't do any exotics in wetlands because they have a potential to get weedy, any exotics. And so yes, there's a huge bit, like any culture, wetlands play a huge bit, but like I said, it is a breadbasket. And then the materials from those wetlands for weaving and a lot of other things are important, and travel from one place to the other. Usually streams, those streams go through wetlands, and there's a rich history there, and some really interesting there's some really interesting history and really interesting of cultural heritage there that each wetland has. That's really interesting. If you have time to sit down with your iwi in your area, it's always worth having a listen to about some of the important wetlands to them. But it's a big part of restoring iwi culture to New Zealand.
Yeah, and bringing back those taonga species.
Yep.
And even the kakatea and tree species as well. Great. What costs are associated with blocking the flow of seasonal streams? Was another question.
Yeah. If done properly, there's very little cost. So basically, ephemeral streams, in case we'll go back, ephemeral streams are what we call, they'll flow through certain parts of the season, usually here around the wintering time. If done properly, creating wetlands in there that actually block a little bit of that water, slows that water down, reduces flooding downstream. Usually, a lot of the ephemeral streams are too steep to actually put wetlands in. So if you try, you end up with a big wall or piping and that kind of thing, which can have some issues, fish passage and that kind of thing. Plus you end up with really deep water on one end and really shallow at the other end, and not that mix. So a lot of ephemeral streams generally don't lend themselves to too much. That being said, there are some of the lower ones that just getting out of the foothills of the hill country and stuff that actually would be ideal places. Most likely they would have been wetlands at one time and somebody's cleaned them out and done some work, but yeah.
How about existing farm dams on say hill country farms, what's the best way to remove sediment buildup in those without causing that sediment to get remobilized and moved
Yep.
downstream?
I think there was a question about wetlands too. Sediment moves across the land, so anything that filters it, and I actually like using some of our native sedges and grasses and plant those anywhere above your wetland or ponds that act as a natural filter. Carex geminata, and I'm sorry because there's no common name for it that I know of, is a perfect one. It's a sward forming sedge, grow wet, dry areas, and it creates a great little filter. It doesn't hurt. When I'm putting any wetlands in, I always, for the most part, always put a sediment pond at the top. And just to act as it basically is a deep area at the top where the water comes in, slows down, sediment drops out before it goes into your wetlands, and that kind of thing. Part of it, yeah, but I think a good natural filter of sedges and grasses and stuff work really well. If you plant up in trees, sometimes your sedges don't grow that much. If you got a lot of trees around your wetland, there's some water coming in from the side hills on there. Plant the understory up with ferns and that kind of thing, something that'll act as a natural filter. And there are some native sedges that really do well in shade too. And so it's just a matter of going down and talking to your nursery about what's appropriate for it.
Dennis Emery has mentioned that iwi preferences for repo or the wetlands to have natural species, not exotic, and also mentions that the policy 6 of the National Freshwater Policy Statement has minimal or no references to Te Tiri or Waitangi, and some anti-Māori sort of speak within that as well.
Yeah, I can't, unfortunately, I can't remember what's all section 6 is, and can't talk to that too much, unfortunately, but would love to have a little bit of a chat with you sometime around that.
Yeah, I agree. And also sort of engagement with catchment groups and opening communication between catchment groups and iwi and hapu in different areas is somewhere where NZ Landcare Trust can support, or your catchment coordinator, to help understand how we can work better together. Then we've got, while we manage nutrients, how do we manage E. coli, especially in constructed wetlands?
UV light. So your open water.
What depth?
So for open water, that's a funny one because Raupo can be aggressive, especially if you've got nutrients coming in. But a meter deep, a meter plus depth will keep you open water for the most part. Raupo will grow out into that, and it'll create a floating mat, and you might need to pull that back a little bit and do a little bit of management of that. But it is it's open waters is basically the other way that we manage for E. coli again is those filter strips, because basically if you treat sediment, you treat a lot of your E. coli. So if you got a filter strip of native sedges and that the water's flowing through, it'll help filter out some of that E. coli too.
Okay. Lorraine, just wondering if you could talk to us about some wetland projects you've been involved with in the region and how Horizons can support landowners in this space.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tanya. I was hoping I'd be able to make the point that my particular involvement is really just in one team of Horizons, in the science team, and we provide a certain service where we will go out to private land or anywhere where a member of the public has requested, or for a pre-resource application type thing, and assess wetlands and identify what type of wetland they are and what categories they might fall under and that kind of thing. But there's also all these other teams in Horizons that also do work on wetlands in various ways. So there's the freshwater advisors who help with fencing and planting of riparian margins and wetland margins. And there's the land management team, which help with retiring wetlands and also planting. And there's also, we've got a rural advice team, which help farmers and help with farm environment plans. And we also have a biodiversity team with biodiversity advisors whose job it is to go out there and identify wetlands on properties that still have quite high natural values. And there's lots of ways that we can help support those really special kind of wetlands. Yeah, so I would just really encourage anyone who even is not even sure if they have a wetland on their property or knows that they do and wants to know more about it to get in touch with us, and we can put you in touch with the right person.
Awesome, thank you.
Real quick, I'll just add to that. When in doubt, have a chat with the council, especially around if you want to restore one wetland or create a new one. Just get those, get a land management advisor out just to have a little bit of a chat and look, see, and that kind of thing. And as Laura pointed out, there's a lot of help around with different groups and stuff, but it always is good because yeah, like I said, I've dealt with multiple regions and each region's a little different. And yep. And a good relationship with your land management advisor is actually is a real good thing.
Thanks, Nathan.
Tanya, sorry, before you continue, I think I actually have to go now because this meeting room I'm in is booked at 1:30 and I'm getting angry stares at the door.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, Lorraine. And if anyone wants to get in touch with Lorraine or any of the panelists, please email me after this webinar and we can put through those contacts. So we'll let Lorraine go. Thank you.
Thank you. It was really great.
Corey has got his hand up, so I'm just going to click allow to talk, Corey, and hopefully it'll work for you. You can turn your mute off if you're still keen. I saw your hand up, but in the meantime, we also have a question from Craig. Nathan, do you have any suggestions or for effectively removing nitrates?
Yeah, wetlands are actually the number one tool in the toolbox. And I mean, this webinar is about wetlands. So I'm going to always say, but there's multiple tools in the toolbox, but wetlands are your number one. Again, you're looking at that 3 to 5% of the catchment flowing into your wetland to get that 80 to 80% plus removement of nitrates. So your wetlands are your best effective way, and constructed wetlands are your most effective way, but your natural wetlands, by protecting your natural wetlands, they're actually quite good at removing nutrients. Now, I'll caveat that to say it depends upon the wetlands. If you got a fen or something like that, which is a low nutrient wetlands, they generally don't want to put nutrients in, but usually fens are elevated, so you're not putting there's no surface flow into them. It's usually groundwater flow goes into them, but they're usually a low nutrient wetland. But most of the wetlands are very effective, and the reason your natural wetlands are more effective is because they got a large organic layer under at the bottom of the wetland that denitrification occurs. And I can't go through the process because I can't even understand the process half the time myself or read it. But you want that anaerobic zone with a lot of carbon in there, and that helps break your nitrogen out into the different things, and it relieves nitric oxide, which actually is a greenhouse gas emitter, but it's not that big a deal because the wetlands don't emit that much compared to how much of the nitrogen it takes out. So your wetlands are, and you're looking again, 3 to 5% of your catchment area, and 70% shallow, so 300 mils or less. and some open water areas that kill the E. coli, and also in constructed wetlands, it allows you to see where the water flow is, but that open water areas are also important.
And Nathan, could you once again go over the best species to plant where? Like what would you plant within that 30 centimeter deep area?
Okay, you would plant your native rushes in your shallow areas. You can actually get away with Carricksecta and giant umbrella sedges. So some of your sedges, I generally if I'm looking at constructed wetlands for nutrient removals, I generally stay away from Raupo, and partly because in the wintertime Raupo dies back, so it is not taking it. You got two mechanisms generally. You've got your denitrification in your anaerobic area, but the plants are also taking nutrients up, and if the Raupo's died back, it's not taking up nutrients. So I stick with your Balmias, your rushes, and what we call emergent vegetation, and some of your sedges, and Schynoplectus. And I apologize because most of them are their scientific name is no common name for them, but those emergent plants are good. The guidelines that NIWA puts out, that Chris puts out, is planted at I think a half-meter spacing. That gets expensive. I plant out throughout and clumps throughout and let it naturally come in and do its thing, just to save cost, because you're putting in a root trainer, so you're at $2 a plant when you put those in, but they will naturally just propagate that shallow area once they're established.
And you would plant those in summertime when the flow's low?
Yep. Anything that I'm planting in the water, I plant through late spring, early summer. And if your wetland doesn't dry out, you can plant it through. The one reason I do that is because the plants are starting to actively grow, and you put it into the water, and they grow. And you're getting that root establishment. If you plant them in the winter time and you get big flows, they could get washed out, that kind of thing. And usually why we don't plant our native plants in the summer, spring and summer, is because of the lack of rainfall during the summer around here. So we don't have to worry about watering them because they're in water.
Awesome. Laura, did you have any questions or comments before we close off for the day?
No, nothing from my end. Obviously, it is a very big learning process, and it comes with a financial burden as well. So just enlist the support of anyone that you can, and feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions around what we did and how we did it and why.
Yeah, I think maybe we could spend 1 minute just talking about other potential income streams for other than fish and game. I know that obviously this Horizons can subsidize 30 or 40% depending on which project it is or which area for fencing and planting, but is there anything else that you've come across? I know Ducks Unlimited is another one people could look at.
Yeah.
So if you've got any areas of open water that would be conducive to ducks living on, that's another avenue to explore as well. Great.
We've after Nathan's recommendations, I think we've got another 70 hectares to go. So anything in terms of advice or support is greatly appreciated.
Yeah. Nathan,
once you put one in, it's an addiction.
I know.
Nathan, do you know any other funding streams?
Funding's always tough around wetlands. It's amazing that the government keeps pushing for wetlands, but we don't get a lot of funding. Regional councils provide a little bit of funding. Fish and Game do, and the Game Bird Habitat Trust do. But hopefully through your catchment group, like I said, over here in Hawke's Bay, some of our catchment groups got funding, and we're putting wetlands in as part of that funding. So some of this funding coming down through the catchment groups is probably outside of the Game Bird Habitat Trust and Fish and Game are our best options. But it comes and goes. Sometimes regional councils put a lot of money towards it for a few years, so take advantage of it when it comes. and it dries up and they get focused on something else. Have a little bit of a chat. Your land management advisor will let you know if they have funding available. And sometimes think outside the box, especially if you're in a catchment group. Applying to some of the environmental trust and stuff might be worth looking into to deal with that. And follow the New Zealand restoration symposiums and the trust, the National Wetlands Trust, because they usually show some opportunities popping up every once in a while. They don't fund anything, but they usually will put up something on their Facebook page or website if there's something coming up.
Excellent. And just make sure that if you're interested in this space, find out if there's a catchment group in your area, and then there's amazing catchment coordinators for the Manawatu River Catchment Collective, the Rangatake River Catchment Collective, and we've just started a new catchment collective for the Wanganui Awa. So get in touch with your coordinator for your area, and that they're starting to roll out showcase projects in different catchments targeting different issues, so looking into different types of sediment traps and different types of wetlands that will target specific issues, and slowing down water for some catchments that flood really quickly in the high country down to low. So please reach out to them, and you can touch base with me if you want to know if there's anything in your area, and I can put you in touch. I'll also send out the recording from today to everyone in a couple of weeks once that's out, and maybe a list of resources. Nathan, we might get those typed up for you to send out. So thank you so much, Laura, for being here today, and I hope everyone's got something out of today. We've got some good comments coming through on the chat. I'll just do a closing karakia, and then I'll let everyone get back on with their work day. See, we said we'd be an hour, and we've actually stuck to it, so that's great. E te atua, kua mutu, a mātou mō tēnei wā, amene. So that's our work at this time is finished. Look after us at all times. Amen. So thank you so much, Nathan, for your expertise. I know that you hopefully won't get 2 more inquiries coming your way about wetlands from the region, but really keen to see the work progress in this space. Nathan is involved with the Awahuri Forest Trust putting in a new wetland near Fielding, and so Nathan's going to be involved with that project, which will hopefully be able to showcase in another year's time the work that's been done there. So thank you so much, Nathan, and have a good day, everyone.
Yes, thank you for attending.